Will you please welcome to the stage 4 crucial supporters of the campaign when it was launched, Garth Crooks with David Davies, David Dean and Gordon Taylor.
David? On that, please. David? Gordon? Ladies and gentlemen, it's an opportunity to lighten the mood a little bit. We've really had a history lesson of what the organisation has been about. But let's remember tonight is a celebration. And we are celebrating 20 years, our anniversary, with you. So, yes, we want to reflect some of the poignant moments in the organisation's history, but also we want it to be entertaining and interesting. I've been asked just for a few minutes, just to give you a flavour, just a flavour of the people who are part of the construction that is kicking out, the very evening you're celebrating tonight. What I call the Founding Fathers. These are 3 of the Founding Fathers of the organisation. Herman Ousley is the 4th member. Gordon, if you can jump on the stool.
I'm having trouble with it.
You're in trouble, okay. All right. It's a very relaxed.
I'm not Dave Allen.
Okay, very, very relaxed. Neil very kindly introduced David Davies, David Dean, and of course, the Chief Executive of the PFA, Gordon Taylor. And I just simply... Hey!
You can have too.
Thank you. Don't worry.
I'm going to stand
you stand. And I just want to get a sense of why they got involved in creating this organisation and being a part of this organisation 20 years ago. If I could actually start with you, David Davies. At the time, you were the Executive Director of the Football Association. And I'm just really interested in, that was 93. It was your job to approach the FA board, correct? And to see if they would support the new initiative by Sir Herman Ousley. How was the notion of such a campaign originally received by the FA?
Garth, when I'd only been in the FA for several weeks, as I remember it, I joined with Terence Frederick Venables, who took us to Euro 96. And I had been a journalist for 23 years, most of my time at the BBC. And I remember receiving this letter on a Thursday morning, I'm pretty certain it was, that said, hey, there's this press conference today in the offices of the Commission for Racial Equality, the old offices in Victoria.
The one we've just seen on the clip.
Yes, indeed. Which is kick racism out of football. And, you know, my old journalistic background said I should go to this. And I remember seeing Gordon's name on it. And I remember seeing Herman Ousley's name on it. And I remember seeing the Football Supporters Association name on it. And I turned up and sat in the audience. And it became pretty obvious to me, firstly, you know, there were various... It wasn't the biggest event I'd ever been to, but it was absolutely... My initial reaction is, why on earth is the organisation I've just joined 2 weeks ago... By the way, certain people thought I'd survive 3 months or so. They'd put up with me 3 months, or I'd put up with them for 3 months. I thought, this is surely what the FA should be in the middle of, not sitting in the seats in the front. And I absolutely say, without Gordon Taylor, without Gordon's involvement and the PFA's involvement, I have no idea where that campaign would have gone. So I paid tribute to Gordon tonight in my little way, because he made this possible. For me, with a small role as a student in the 60s and all those days, who'd played a small role in the minor, tiny role in the anti-apartheid movement, it was a no-brainer. And if we were going to use football to fight racism, why on earth would we not?
Was it difficult convincing the FA at the time to get involved in this initiative?
Well, the attitude of the FA at the time, as the attitude of the FA, remember the awful times that football in this country had been through. Hillsborough, Heysel, the Bradford fire, all those things. And Herman's absolutely right. Football was committing suicide, in my view. And, you know, it wasn't only Herman's family that wasn't going to football matches. And there was an attitude that was all tied up with football shouldn't be involved and sport shouldn't be involved with politics. And there was a whiff of politics about this, of course. And I had no problem with any of that, perhaps because of my background or whatever. But ultimately, for me, in convincing the FA board and the senior staff of the FA, my question was simply, why will you not get involved with this? And there was silence.
Right. David Dean, let me turn to you now, because you were vice chair of Arsenal Football Club at the time, and also Premier League representative of the FA board. Why were you so compelled to get the Premier League involved in this initiative?
Garth, I was hoping that as a Spurs man, the first thing you'd say to me after Saturday, through gritted teeth, maybe, something else.
I have been invited on Table 9 as a guest of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. Now, the one thing that we are at White Hart Lane, we are gracious in defeat. We are fantastic in success, but we've not had much of that lately. Congratulations,
Thank
David,
you.
to Arsenal
Well
Football Club from your neighbours. We are family after all. But the question
is, yes.
What compelled you to get involved? Because the Premier League was a new initiative and you had some convincing to do, didn't you?
Absolutely right. But the Premier League was going to be, we were certain, was going to be the flagship of English football. It was going to be very high profile. It was going to attract stars from all over the world. And it was important that they bought into the concept. They had to get involved in the Kick It Out campaign. And we made sure they did.
Was it a battle?
Not really, no. I think everybody bought into it. They realised that something had to be done. And necessity is the mother of invention. It was needed. And of course, I was very passionate about it. And so much so, and when we went on in years, and this is how the game actually has advanced in England, people don't realise that it actually made a lot of progress in England with black players playing. I can remember in 2004, Arsenal had a team one day, I think, of 9 or 10 black players, and I tell you who they were. Ashley Cole, Gail Clichy, Kolo Touré, Sol Campbell, Patrick Vieira, Gilberto Silva, Lauren, Wiltor, Canu, Thierry Henry. Now tell me, that's not a bad team.
That's not a bad team, That's not a bad team. But on the back of that fantastic team, they were your players. Did you become very aware of the racial abuse? Not
Absolutely.
just they were getting, but I mean, you were working with Ian Wright before that.
Absolutely.
Paul Davis is here in the studio,
yes,
Kevin Campbell, David Rocastle, Michael Thomas.
Of course.
Did that make you more aware of what was going on? They were your players.
More determined than ever, because we had to see the black people, black faces in the teams. And I remember Sven-Göran Eriksson, when he became England manager, and I said, what was it like at Lazio? And they had a big problem at Lazio. He said when he joined, they didn't have a black player in the team. And he said he was so embarrassed that every time he was managing Lazio, that they would abuse, the fans would abuse the opponent players, the black players. And he said he was embarrassed, and he begged Cragnotti, Sergio Cragnotti, the president, to buy a black player because that would stop the issue.
Yes.
And that was very important. So, and that's indeed what happened.
Can I turn to Dawn Taylor, the Chief Executive of the PFA? You were Chief Executive then, you still are today, you were there in the beginning, you're here now. When you look over the 20 years, Gordon, what are the most significant landmarks, do you think, over the last 20 years in Kick It Out?
Well, certainly to see such a crowd tonight, you know, so diverse, and the size of it compared to 10 years ago, if it was in proportion to the interest in Kick It Out, then clearly, you know, that message is getting there. I just feel when you have people like Gordon Brown here, you know, so passionate about it, and of course, you know, with Martin Luther King's son, you can't do a lot better than that, and Lord Ousley. I just feel it has been an impact, and what Herman said is probably maybe the biggest thing. Why should it be kick it out? And why should it just be a weekend? Because even with the PFA, and you know from your time with the PFA, in the 80s we're talking about, that was a real decade that you've seen where I wondered if the game was going to survive. It was so bad. The health, the safety, the hooliganism, it was going to be ID cards. And in the mid-80s, we thought the only chance the game's got is to have some social responsibility, which is a buzzword now, but wasn't so usual then. And we agreed with the Football League, prior to the Premier League, that players would give 3 to 4 hours a week for community activities. But it was also built on the principle of anti-racism, on behaviour, of players going into school and teaching gospels of good behaviour, of getting involved with residents and local business. And football used to be, if you were winning, more would come than if you were losing. They didn't see themselves as a focal point. And we've heard Nelson Mandela mention tonight, and saying sport, and with our sport, of course, football, it's the game's biggest participant. It's the game's biggest spectator sport. Has the ability to turn things on the head and unite people. And I think that's why anti-racism was a key factor in that community program. And suddenly, you know, we got into through the 80s, because we're banned from Europe. But the more and more black players were coming through. You know that. We've got Cyril here tonight in '79. He was the PFA Young Player of the Year. In that decade, I was working to get black players involved. You were the PFA chairman. We had the first PFA Black Players Player of the Year. We'd had Viv Anderson playing for his country. There was a greater confidence. And when, you know, talked to Brendan, there was a serious issue about whether black players should walk off. And it was really about trying to do things all together, really. I know Herman said, like a commando unit, you can come off, but unless we can convince football authorities that we're all in this together, it's like life, you know, with just finishing with Martin Luther King, when you're talking about icons. When that famous March to Washington, it didn't succeed just because it was just black youngsters and black adults. There was black and white, and as a result, Kennedy was suddenly taken aback and things started to improve. And that, I just felt there was a confidence then in the 90s to get involved and really illuminate it. And with the advice I got, that's what we did.
That's really interesting, because what you've talked there about, you've talked about inclusion, not just at administrative level, but also players being acknowledged by their peers at national level. And you've also brought it right up to smack bang up to date about one of the greatest challenges that professional players have to face is, if the procedures and the protocols in football that Kick It Out has worked so hard to bring about, if they don't work, what do professional black players do? What do they do? Do they do what I did in my generation, grin and bear it, or do they walk? Yeah. It's the question that I want to put to the founding fathers. I want to ask each and every one of you, and I want to start with you, David Davies there. If a black player in this country was to walk, and had good cause to walk, David, I'm not talking about Danny Alves, who dealt with this in a particular way, as John Barnes did in '87 with that FA Cup game, with great grace, but if the referee didn't protect them, and there was no protocol in place to protect that player, and he walked, would you support that action?
My answer to that is unequivocally yes.
You would?
Absolutely and completely. For
Why?
me, but ultimately, for me, it's the player's decision, right, as well. But I also say, you mentioned black players in this. What about the responsibility of white players in this as well? For me, very clearly, all players have a responsibility for, you know, we hear a lot about team bonding and teams together. We've been waging this fight, so many people in this room, so much more than people like me. So much more, because I'm out of the front line now. But it is so important. I saw what Danny Alves did, and he was rightly applauded. And I happen to think that sometimes when you're fighting some of these battles, humor right? And that sort of action is fantastically rewarding. Having said all that, the authorities, for me, have to ultimately say, if after 20 years, if after every warning, if after everything, every campaign, every day of action, and by the way, I think this generation needs to find, I know how difficult it is, but needs to find new ways of action, new ways of getting the message across. If players feel that they have exhausted, right, the limits to which they can go, there is no reason on this planet, even in the World Cup final, why they should have to put up with that sort of abuse. That's what I feel.
Well, yeah, I can hear the buzz in the room, and just bear with us 2 more minutes, because I just want to get the sense from David Dean and Gordon Taylor. David, do you agree with David Davies?
I do.
You do?
I do. I think it is a very sensitive subject, and in the end, it's up to the player himself.
Now, I've got to interrupt you here, because you thought about this. You've really thought long and hard about this, haven't you?
I do, but let me say this, that in the end, I'm a great believer, don't get mad, get even. How does a black player, when he's been abused, how does he get even? In the end, it has to be the authorities. And in a way, it shouldn't be up to the player himself to decide to walk off the pitch. It should be the referee who needs the authority. He's got to be the one to say, this is unacceptable behavior, we're off. And when the referee is strong enough and bold enough and empowered to take that, that's when you'll see real radical change.
Just bear with me just a second. Gordon, you were with me in, I think it was Madrid, when England played.
Yeah.
And Sean Wright-Phillips and Ashley Cole were roundly booed by some of the Spanish fans. And you were immediate in your action. But what I want to ask you is what I've asked the other 2 gentlemen. Would you support those players if they'd walked off? They're your members.
Yeah, I would. I just felt that, as you know, I rang up BBC. I thought that was also a sign a few years ago in Spain, when there was general condemnation of the black players in the England team. The impact that Kick It Out and other bodies that you've mentioned tonight, with Show Racism, the Red Card, etc., Football Unites, Racism Divides, European Committee, getting through, that there was a general condemnation that, you know, years before we would have never have had that. And as a friendly game, I thought it would have worked. I do feel, however, that, you know, it just would bring the authorities to shame. Football's a team game. And if any black player chose to walk off, if it had been Yaya Toure, it's a team game, and it would have needed, I would like the whole team to come with him. Yeah. But there is a clear protocol established now. As it was in the Man City game, you know, it wasn't the referee's fault. It was the official, and that official, and with the club, they've got to pay the price. I do feel as well, though, if we're trying to get sanctions, and just to avoid anybody thinking we could be complacent or rest on any laurels, when you see, and we've got FIFA officials here tonight and hopefully UEFA, when you see the penalties for financial fair play of 50 million, and when you see the penalties for racism at 5,000, we've really got to do some rebalancing up.
Well, we have a FIFA executive in our midst. I'm not in the business of embarrassing our guests, but we do pose the question. Gordon, I need to take you back to the original question, and that is, if a player in this country walked off the pitch, would you back him?
Yeah, I thought we'd back the player because of how he felt so badly, but I don't really think that's the answer. Herman referred to it. It's what I've said before. Either we're all in this together. I don't want a player individualised, walking off, or even anybody thinking the racists have won. It's got to be a show of solidarity, and that solidarity is not just from his teammates, but from the opposition, from the referee and the officials and the club. And they get on the tannoy and they say, unless this stops, this game is being called off. And if it doesn't stop, they all come off, and that's what we've got to do. And you've got to close the ground down, not partial closure, half closure. We're playing at it still, and I tried to give that analogy with the the fine for financial fair play, which is putting money into the game, compared to the fines that we've seen for racism, and that tells you how much more we need to get through.
Final word, David, final word.
Don't forget, Garth, that the laws of the game, the player cannot leave the field of play without the referee's authority. So there is a delegate, the laws of the game, are they going to change? Now, we don't want that, and I come back to the fact something needs to be done. The referees have got to take the lead in this.
Ladies and gentlemen, your founding fathers, David Davies, David Dean, and Gordon Taylor. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.